everybody. Steve is going to take it over from here. Steve, learn us something.
Thanks, Jeff, for the great introduction. Very humbled to be following Jessica. I'm a huge fan. I first saw her speak at DevOps Enterprise in 2014. So it's been a long road since then, but I base a lot of what I do on those early experiences. So she's a big hero of mine. And the rest of the lineup is just amazing. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this goes off without a hitch. All right. So this title of my talk is kind of tongue-in-cheek. I know Patrick asked me if I'd be interested in speaking, and it looked like he was putting together a conference that was a little more down to earth, and so something that will grab some people's attention, hopefully ruffle a few feathers and get some good Q&A going was the goal. Really, for me, value stream mapping has been a blessing and a curse. It's something that's been tried and tested for many, many decades now, but I think the way that we've known it in the past is not really serving us in the future. So going to walk through that with you and hopefully share some information that you find valuable, and taking the 20% of value stream mapping that I find really important, that gives the 80% of the value. So to start this off, let me find my window again. Oh man, one moment. I had all my monitors all set up and then it fell right through. Okay, so really to kick this off, by now we've heard a lot of really great transformation stories, and I think one that kind of nails it for me is in the fall of 2019, I was at DevOps Enterprise Summit, and Nationwide was sharing a story about their transformation, and it was quite shocking. And I think these are stats that we would actually find in many, many organizations, but it took a lot of courage for Nationwide to really dig in and look at them and then confront them in order to improve. And this 2.5% actually comes from the percentage of time that the average Nationwide developer was spending on developing code. And, that's the primary job function, and yet having such a small portion of your time being focused on that activity really alludes to a level of waste and a level of frustration and a level of, let's say, just a problematic use of time in a giant organization. And I think we see this in a lot of enterprises. And to tackle this, they've been through a long transformation effort. They tried a lot of things. They're big fans of DevOps, but what really caused them to turn a corner was adopting value stream mapping. And late in 2018, they started looking at value stream mapping as a way of tackling this visibility problem, this waste problem, and they brought their release cycle from 3 years down to 3 months. And that really hammered it home to me that this is kind of a practice that's ready for the enterprise, it's ready for everybody. It really validated a lot of assumptions and beliefs that I had around the value stream. So myself, what I'm going to do with this presentation is take us through some history, some context, compare value streams to pipelines. I think a lot of people are focused on pipelines when the value stream is a context that's extremely valuable. And how we can look at value stream maps in really lean terms, and not the traditional models that we've seen for a long time. And then take you through an example of mapping a real value stream and then adding some complexity where it can be valuable. So quick intro about myself. I've been in tech for about 20 years. I've been through startup gigs, enterprise gigs. My previous job was CTO of a fast-growing startup. And I've always been fascinated by automation, process engineering, flow, When DevOps came around, I was a big fan of that. I run the Toronto community here, and I have since I think 2011. And DevOps Days Toronto, of course. But really, I've encountered value stream maps a long time ago. I went to business school for a bit before I got tired of it. And part of that program was looking at traditional manufacturing, traditional ways of lean enterprise activity, optimizing businesses and workflows and supply chains. And so this idea of value stream mapping came up, but I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time because look at it. If you look at the definition of value stream mapping on Wikipedia, this is the image that comes up, and it's not exactly readable, right? It's not exactly easily understood. So I mostly ignored it at the time, even though it kind of echoed to me a few patterns that I'd seen in my past. I'd always looked at processes. I'd always been obsessed with kind of efficiency and trying to find the highest impact activities with the lowest effort, right? And targeting waste and optimizing. But these kind of examples are all over value stream mapping. This is, for instance, a basic value stream map, still unreadable, right? I mean, you need to go to business school. You need to have a Six Sigma certification to read a lot of this stuff. And this is typically as simple as it gets. But we have illustrations of lean value stream maps that are anything but. In this case, we're getting some highlights of, let's look at the 2 days, but then we have these floating glasses, which need a glossary to figure out. And I think a lot of this is overly complex and it's not very valuable, right? This is the glossary of icons that you have to memorize to make sense of any of this stuff. And I just find that in order for a value stream map to really be valuable and useful, it has to resonate with people. It has to be easily understood. So I think all of this gets in the way, and it's largely unnecessary. This comes from car manufacturing. It comes from traditional manufacturing, where we're dealing with a high level of automation, a high level of precision, a high level of iteration and repetition. And so in some cases, seconds matter, minutes matter. In software, we're tackling new problems all the time. Things vary. We don't have to have the level of detail that we have in traditional manufacturing, and we don't need this level of detail because it actually gets in the way of understanding what's really going on. So I kind of take this and come back to the idea of where is the value that we're trying to get out of this, right? We do an activity like value stream mapping to find waste and to find opportunities for improvement. So where can we get that value? Where can we get that in a value stream map if we can't read it, right? And who's the audience for this? Who are we going to be sharing this with? Because if they can't understand it, then it's not valuable. And that's kind of brought me to my approach to all this, which is drastically simplified. And I think very easy for people to take away from this presentation and do themselves. So I mentioned the origins in business school, but really it came to a head in my previous position as CTO. And I'd look at our key processes like onboarding new customers or scaling up infrastructure, bringing up test environments. There was a lot of value streams, a lot of processes where we didn't really have a great idea of what was going on. Some cases, there's a lot of handoffs. There would be people in different continents working on things. There would be a lot of steps involved because these things just organically grow, right? When you're in a startup, you just figure it out and then you clean it up later. And so I kind of approach this by taking a step back and saying to my team, let's figure out what the whole thing looks like and then dig into the details and try and measure this. And I didn't call it value stream mapping at the time. It was just trying to look at the processes. And we did it in Google Sheets. We really just had a set of columns where we laid out every single step and the measurement, the timing for each step. And then we would do multiple passes. So every time we onboard a customer, let's record and let's see where all the time is used. And then we dug into it. And since then, I've kind of refined the technique. And I'm going to skip over a piece, but leaving that position and thinking of what am I going to focus all my time on, people started thinking more about value streams. There was a lot of activity around this idea that we really have to be maturing these processes. We're not reinventing the wheel all the time. And so it makes sense for us to kind of double down on improving and optimizing. And that brought me to start this consulting company called Visible, focused on value streams, because this is really something that I'm passionate about. And I think everybody really needs to start doing this more often. And I kind of want to dedicate my time to making this easy and accessible to people. So to give you a little bit more context of stepping back to what is the value from value stream mapping, what are we really looking to get out of it, right? Why are we doing the activity? Why even have a value stream map? And it's comes down to trying to get really valuable information about our current surroundings. So what are we dealing with? What are we trying to do? What's our current state? So that would be our current state value stream map. Where should we go from here? Is really a question of what's holding us back, what's in our way, what's our current bottleneck. That's where the measurement comes in super handy. And then how should we get there? That's where the future state value stream map becomes really valuable. When you can define how you want to operate and what you can do given your capabilities, where should we spend our time? Where should we spend our money? And a lot of teams will operate under the assumption that they need to invest in a specific area based on industry best practices or what other companies are doing, benchmarks, maturity models. But really, what's valuable to you and your organization is very unique, and it changes over time. And it's really about finding what is your biggest bottleneck, and you should focus there and then move on. So I like to think of combining compasses and maps, and I see value stream mapping as one of the maps that's really critical. And I find that the industry and a lot of people focus a lot on compasses, things like North Stars, DORA metrics, which are fantastic, using checklists, using maturity models. That's kind of analogous to me of like heading in a direction, right? If we're following Uber's example, we're just sort of heading towards some arbitrary criteria. And it's not necessarily based on where we are, right? It's based on where they are and where we perceive ourselves to be. But when we think of where we get value from compasses is in combining them with a map. So we understand not only where we're going, but we see what's between us and where we're going. And so things like value stream mapping, value stream maps are super, super valuable for that. Capability mapping to see what are the core competencies that we need and that we have, and how do we leverage our strengths and how do we fill the gaps that we have. And when we combine them together, we get something that's incredibly powerful. Because if I'm taking a value stream map, and I'm going to show an example of how you can combine something like a value stream map with DORA metrics to really get a fantastic idea of not only where you are and where you want to go, but how to get there and what's really in your way. So in a lot of organizations, this might look like a familiar picture. I find that it's very common to have all kinds of activities and waste and bottlenecks that are beyond our CI/CD pipelines, outside of the automation that we have, outside of our processes, outside of anything that we're really keeping track of or paying attention to. And it might show up in Jira, it might not. It probably doesn't, right? So when we look at the real measurement of what's going on, it captures a lot more of this, the things that are really painful. And that allows us to really tackle what's holding us back. And I think it's really important. It can be painful to acknowledge, this is what's really going on. But I think we see so much value from transparency. We see so much value from acknowledging the real scenario that we're dealing with, that it gives us an incredible starting point. It puts us on the same page with our teams. And it can be a really cathartic activity to look at what's actually happening, because instead of throwing your time and money at something that you think is going to change and improve things, you can actually tackle things that are really affecting you. So a lot of teams spend a lot of time looking at pipelines, and we as an industry are kind of obsessed with CI/CD and automation. And it's because we have a lot of vendors who are providing a lot of fantastic products. They're fun to play with. Automation is always seems like a good idea. And we have a lot of people talking still today. I think I read probably 3 times today, scrolling through my various feeds, to automate everything, right? People are talking about this all the time. And it's not true. You should be automating what's really valuable. And what that means is that we have to look outside of the pipeline. The pipeline is already automated for the most part, right? It's the least of your worries, because what really is probably holding you back is outside of your automation, right? The things like the approvals that take forever, the meetings that happen for no reason, the emails that sit in somebody's inbox for a week because they're on vacation. That all makes everything that happens in the pipeline seem pretty insignificant, right? Because if we're wasting 3 days a week on handoffs, then what is a 4-hour pipeline in comparison? So I think it's really important to look at this big picture and step away from the pipeline and look at, where are we starting the value stream, where are we ending the value stream, and what's really going on. So to simplify this, and in contrast with what we saw earlier in the presentation, this example of super complex value streams, just for anyone who's new or anyone who's wondering about the sort of elemental pieces that are incredibly valuable here, we're talking about steps and we're talking about timing. And what happens pretty often, if we compare this to just looking at a pipeline, is that this pipeline is one step, and this manual stuff upstream and the waiting time is really, you guys can see my cursor, that's fantastic, even though it's going to be slow. But if we're looking at manual steps and we're looking at waiting time, these are incredibly valuable issues to tackle. And this automation piece is probably insignificant in comparison, because we're probably tackling maybe hours, maybe minutes with automation. But the opportunity for improvement in the manual world is huge, right? So if we look at an example, a high-level example in abstract again, from ticket to enabling a feature, what we have is this idea of measurement, which is incredibly valuable. A lot of teams, they'll draw flow diagrams, and there's no concept of measurement incorporated in it, and it's of limited value. We really get so much value by seeing the measurement involved in any of this. So the primary measurement, timing, which is the step timing, how long does it take us to create a ticket, right? The wait time, how long does that ticket sit before someone actually starts to work on it, for instance? And our CI/CD pipeline is really concerned with this piece in the middle, the code to deploy steps, right? So all that waiting time up front, all the frustration, all the handoff, all the misunderstanding that can cause a bunch of rework and a bunch of wasted effort is ignored by the CI/CD pipeline. So it really helps to be zoomed out and looking at the whole process. So I'm going to actually layer, to put this more in context, and share with you how we combine sort of this map with Compass. I'm going to layer on the DORA metrics so that everyone can see like how you can use something like a value stream map to start measuring DORA metrics without instrumenting all your tools, without a bunch of automation, without waiting weeks or months to get those measurements. You can literally walk through your process with a stopwatch or your phone in realistic terms and measure all of this and start getting data, right? And it's really not that challenging. So we'll see lead time start to finish. We see deployment frequency echoing that CI/CD pipeline frame. We see mean time to recover. So once we deploy, how long does it take for us to switch gears and redeploy and either ideally fail forward and fix those issues? And then change fail percentage. How often are we deploying code that fails? How often are we going into production with code issues, with product issues? So it becomes this really valuable framework that we can layer all kinds of measurements on top of and put them in a visual context of the entire process and really start to get rapid, valuable measurement. And that can speak to the business, that can speak to the product teams, that can speak to sales success. People can start to see, okay, when you say deployment frequency, now I understand what it means because I can see the picture. So if we're going to look at a more specific example, often what I'll do with teams is to start really, really high with this. And I think it's really valuable to get a high level starting point. Let me move my cursor out of the way because you can always drill down and decide where you want to focus your energy. But starting high means that you're bringing people in based on a very, very general understanding. And then you can zoom in and zoom in. So this is from a Fortune 100 company, a gigantic organization, very long release process. They're running safe, actually, very complex physical and digital products combined. And we decided we're going to focus on product development. We're going to focus on execution. We're going to focus on staging deployment. And these are all sort of hypotheses. We could actually measure these out if we wanted to, but if we have a good idea, we can just go ahead and dive in, right? And you can switch gears and look at different areas however you like. But it can be valuable to kind of lay these out and then specifically dive in, because anyone following the process, if they weren't part of the exercise, they can easily see, okay, here's how we got to where we're going. So if we look at a specific software delivery value stream inside of staging deployment, because we have a hypothesis that we can improve our staging deployment process. Maybe it's incredibly painful. People complain about it all the time. It's failing. It takes forever to spin up an environment, for instance. Let's dig into it and look at a value stream map to measure exactly what's going on. So if we look at our staging deployment process, we start with artifact creation, we end with validation. These specific steps don't really matter, but for illustration purposes, what we were looking at initially was the leadership in the organization. They said, we have $20 million we need to spend on DevOps initiatives. We want to build automated deployment. And this was based on something, right? They read some case study, or they saw a talk, or they talked to somebody and heard that automated deployment is the greatest thing in the world. It's pretty great, but is it your biggest bottleneck? And that's what we wanted to figure out, right? Maybe so, maybe not. So you get there by measuring. And we looked at, if we measure every step of the process, we measure the wait time, some interesting patterns start to pop out. And you'll see these highlighted in red here. So what happens is we get two hotspots. And this is all the detail that we need to make a really good, informed decision about where we should focus. Certainly, we can decide that focusing on automated deployment and spending $20 million might only save us 12 minutes every time we run this process, right? So we've already saved a ton of time, a ton of effort trying to do something that is not actually going to move the needle. But if we're looking at environment creation and acceptance testing, all of a sudden we've got 11 hours, 20 hours. These are huge chunks of the value stream, especially compared to everything else that's going on. So something's going on in environment creation, something's going on in acceptance testing. Maybe there's something we can improve, maybe not. But at least we know where to look further. And that's incredibly valuable. And by comparison, we're looking at roughly 15 minutes with artifact deployment. So we know any time we spend there is going to have a minor impact. And that's going to save us a lot of effort, frustration. We're going to settle a lot of arguments with this for people have different ideas about where we should spend our time. And that's super, super valuable to get us moving forward. But we still have this difference in measurement. So where should we be spending our energy? 20 hours is obviously more than 11. But what if smoke testing fails 60% of the time? Now, all of a sudden, environment creation bumps up a bit, right? It's happening more often because we're going back. If we're going back from smoke testing to environment creation, then all of a sudden we're incurring these penalties. We don't have this 8-hour wait time possibly every time, but this starts to creep up towards 20 hours. And because it's upstream, it's a little bit more valuable. So you can make these sort of decisions based on real data, and that's incredibly powerful. So there's a lot more detail that we can add to this. If you want, you can start highlighting roles. So who's actually performing each step, that can be incredibly valuable, because if we've got a different owner at every step, that's a lot of handoffs. And if we can streamline that and say, instead of one person able to complete one task, maybe one person can complete 3, and then they're just handing off to themselves, they can just fly through. We can look at the tools involved, because if we have fragmented tools and they're not integrated, that could be a big cause of wait time. We can look at the artifacts that are created every step. So what is what are we actually building every single time? Maybe we're just producing an email, and then we can say, okay, well, what's the value of that email? And inside of the steps themselves, we can look at how much time is actually spent on adding value, right? Out of artifact deploy, are we waiting for machines to finish things, or are they constantly working at peak efficiency? Percent complete and accurate is the last one. That's kind of a measurement of quality. But at each step, what is the percentage of what we're producing that is complete and accurate? Which is how much are we creating that's going to get thrown back because it's of poor quality, or it's not up to spec, or we're unclear on the requirements. We can start to measure all kinds of things layered on top, but this is graduated complexity, right? We're not demanding all this detail up front. We're starting from a very clear picture, and it's very easy to understand, whether you're in sales, whether you are in marketing, whether you are in success, whether you're in development, whether you're in leadership at any level. Everybody can look at something like this, and people don't have arguments over how to interpret 12 hours. It doesn't have to be precise, but when you have 12 hours versus 2 minutes, it's hard to argue about those details. So to kind of wrap up here, I know we're getting to time. Where I see a lot of this value inside of value stream mapping is the idea of, we're bringing visibility to people. We're bringing measurement to settle arguments, to prevent opinion in decisions, to make very high quality decisions. And it's all in the service of improvement. We're going to drive real improvement by focusing on what's really holding us back and what's really impacting us. And the other great news is that this is everywhere. You can use the exact same practices to tackle your triage, your incident response, your data lifecycle, make your meetings more efficient. You can improve your hiring process. There's no process that isn't a value stream, and you can use the same practices to improve all of them. To sum up the benefits that I see, I think the relevance is really important. We're not looking at industry benchmarks. We're not looking at checklists or arbitrary maturity models. This is based on your team, your organization right now as it is. And that's incredibly powerful. We're not talking about measuring against somebody else. You're measuring against yourself. And it's accessible. It's easy to read. The whole practice is really bringing people together, whether they're distributed around the world and we're doing this over Zoom and a digital whiteboard, or if we're all in the same room. it works the same. It's the same principles and the same value, and it's actionable. These are bottlenecks that are affecting you right now, and the payoff when we're talking about some process that executes every week, you get that benefit over and over and over again. So you'll hear about like Satya Nadella talking about he thinks one of the most important things that a company can work on is how they work. And I agree. And a company like Microsoft, I think they have 1,500 people focused on just workflow and optimizing workflow. Google spends something like $1 billion on it. And I think that, the proof's in the pudding. They all have excellent reputations for optimizing workflow. And I think it's something that we don't spend enough time on. So with that, I will encourage you to start where you are. I hope I've given you something that you can walk away with and implement yourself, but I'm definitely available to talk more about it. I'd love to chat about strategies for implementing this, and I'd love to help you out. So I've got slides, I've got a quick assessment to get some information and share some info. And I've got a blog and a lot of more resources at my website. Thank you very much.
Steve, thanks for the talk. It was a lot of good information in there. Unfortunately, we're a little over, so we don't have time for Q&A. But thanks again. Please hop into the Slack chat, the track DevSecOps for the continued conversation there.
Thanks. I definitely will. I'll be in Slack.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.